Dueling decisions on Obamacare, and the endgame could gut the law entirely. One appeals court ruling the government subsidies for those on the federal exchange is unconstitutional, I should say. That applies to 36 different states. Another court, hours later, ruled the opposite way, saying the federal subsidies are good in all 50 states. Constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley says the case could be the death blow to Obamacare.
Just last week, I told Congress that Halbig was a live torpedo in the water for Obamacare, and that torpedo just hit.
Wyoming Senator John Barrasso is chairman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee. He's also a doctor as well. And Senator, good morning and welcome back.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Is Turley right? Is this the torpedo?
Well, I believe that this ruling could actually be a crippling blow to the health care law because, let's face it, this law continues to be unworkable, unpopular, and what we see is people all across the country are realizing that this is a law that was passed by politicians making promises that they know weren't true in terms of lower premiums, in terms of keeping your doctor, in terms of the cuts made to Medicare. All of these things continue to be unworkable and unpopular.
All right, so now what happens? Because you've got, 11 judges on that court in Washington, D.C. There could be a direct appeal to these 11 judges, most of whom were appointed. Well, most of whom are Democrat, many of them appointed by the president. You think they're going to go against this ruling?
Well, I don't know how they're going to rule. I want to get this to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think we're looking to another high noon moment in front of the Supreme Court. I think the president is going to want to try to slow down getting this to the Supreme Court because he knows how poorly written the law was. He knows that there are people that voted for the law, that never read it, didn't know what was in it, and he knows that people all across the country continue to be opposed to the impact of this law. You know, he talks about providing coverage or insurance. As a doctor, I want to provide care to people, and there's a huge difference when people have an insurance card through Obamacare, but they can't keep their doctor, they can't get to a hospital in their communities. Those are reasons that people believe that they've lost their own choices and that it's Washington that's in control now and they don't like it.
So there could be millions hanging in the balance, depending on which way this goes. And I think for the sake of this discussion, we're really not going to know for a year, right?
Well, I think we're not going to. Yeah, I think we're not going to know for a year. Things take a long time to go through the Supreme Court, but when you talk about the subsidies and the way the law was written in terms of having to get your money through the state exchange for your subsidy, Washington has always used financial efforts to entice states to do things, money as a bargaining chip, and I believe that the law as written said that only people that set up state exchanges could get their subsidies that way. So I believe the D.C. Circuit Court was correct. I think if the Supreme Court rules on the way the law is written, they will uphold that, and that's why I want to get this to the Supreme Court, and why I think the president is trying to slow it down.
And Democrats argue this was a typo. Was it a typo or just a poorly written law?
Well, I think, number one, the law was poorly written, and that's why there's so much chaos and confusion around the law. But I think this was originally written intentionally to say that only the states that set up their exchanges would have the people living in those states get these subsidies, and that was the enticement by Washington to have the states create that. So if the law was popular, states might have gone that way, but this law has been so unpopular around the country. 36 states said, no, we don't want to set up our own exchanges, and that's what made, I think, the administration to force the IRS to make a ruling to say, okay, you can give subsidies through the federal exchange as well.
Yeah, and some governors have chosen to go one way and some have chosen to go another way. A high noon moment yet again at the Supreme Court. We will wait to see if that happens. Senator, thank you. John Barrasso.
Thanks so much for having me.
Republican from Wyoming. Thank you.